Quiet on set. Picture is up. All right, roll sound.
Rolling.
Roll cameras.
Cams rolling.
And 3, 2.
Hey everybody, how's it going? And welcome back to Hank's Think Tank. We got a great show for you today. In our continuing efforts to educate the public and let them know who's running for this and that, I have a great guest with me today. His name is Ernest Bells. He is a Texas State Representative, District 18. He's running for re-election. His opponents are Janice Holt and Ronnie Bubba Tullis. Mr. Bells was elected to his first term in 2016. He is a native Texan, a rancher, a family man, and currently resides in Shepherd, Texas. As our conservative representative, he has sponsored over 25 individual pieces of legislation, and he has an excellent voting record. Representative Bells has served 3 terms in the Texas House and is seeking re-election for a 4th. Good afternoon, Representative Bells. How are you doing today?
Doing good, Hank. I appreciate you having me today.
Good to have you in. I wanted to also give a quick shout out to Ellie Berry in your office, and she was instrumental in helping us to do all the legal work and put this whole thing together. So thank you, Ellie. I appreciate it, and I owe you lunch or something. So I'd like to go ahead and just kind of jump right in, if you wouldn't mind. Why don't you just give us a quick synopsis about Representative Bells? Who are you? Where are you from? And yeah, let's go with that.
No, glad to. Like I said, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Okay.
It's East County is very near and dear to my heart. Family goes back here for a long time. I was born and raised there in Shepherd, Texas, on a dairy and a beef cattle operation. We milked about 265 head at 2 in the morning and 2 in the evening.
Wow.
7 days a week. We also ran commercial trucks that ran around the clock and a few hundred head of beef cattle. So you definitely learn what work is at an early age.
Oh, yeah.
So I've done a little bit of everything. Was very involved in 4-H and FFA, and the youth are very near and dear to me. I've been a member of our fair board there, San Jacinto County Fair, for the last 9 or 10 years. I've been chairman of our youth auction. Even when I was elected, that was something that I wanted to be able to stay very active with and involved. So I built my first house when I was a junior in high school, paid that off before I graduated, started a business then, started doing cattle reproduction work of all random things, just because we had the dairy, we had the beef cattle operation, and that kind of segued after my time there at Texas A&M University into whitetail reproduction. And now I've got one of the only fully automated mobile labs in the United States that specializes in laparoscopic artificial insemination of white-tailed deer.
Wow.
That is a niche of a niche market, but it affords me the opportunity to make a very good living in a short period of time. I covered Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Louisiana, Florida, and Mexico the year before I ran for office. And once I ran for office, we reined everything back in to make sure that I was here and available. So fortunate thing about that occupation, it's I can make a good living when we're not in the legislature.
Right.
A lot of my colleagues are attorneys, or they're in real estate, or they're in insurance, and I am just a working class guy. I've had a Class A CDL driving truck since I was 17, welded for a while, equipment operator, have done a little bit of everything.
Yeah, that's good.
And I tell you, that's been a really big asset to help bridge the gap and convey the message of our rural values there in Austin.
Okay.
Because there's 150 members of the House. There's 150 very strong type A personalities.
Oh, yeah.
And you can pretty well count on just over one hand how many guys understand what rural Texas is and what we do here.
That's a different life. Yeah.
It truly is. It's Harris County, you look at the number of representatives that they have, this district is going to be 3 1/4 counties. So Harris County, where they have a ton of separate voices, I represent San Jacinto County, born and raised. We go back there about 5 generations. Liberty County, that's where my mom's family's from. They go back there about 6 generations. So it's kind of neat that a lot of family ties there. And then also now with redistricting, we go over to Hardin County, and we have East County here in Montgomery County. So it's I'll tell you, East County is very different than Montgomery County as a whole. It's you guys are still very rural and
we're suffering from growing pains really bad.
You are. And we've been dealing a lot with that in Liberty County. It's
I'm sure
that's something that it takes it takes a unique perspective to be able to truly understand it,
Right.
and help convey that so that we get the help.
Yeah, and it's critical because as we're growing, we need to ensure that the correct planning is all in place. Planning for drainage, planning for growth, planning for highways and road construction,
Yes, sir.
and just infrastructure altogether. And actually, I'm going to get into a little bit of infrastructure later on. But so you've had 3 terms. What is your greatest accomplishment as a state rep that you feel like you've had so far, if you could single out anything?
Being an effective voice for rural Texas. I tell you, it's we've been able to tackle all the big things. We were able to get an additional $1.8 billion to secure our southern border. That was huge. We were able to protect the life of the unborn with the Heartbeat Act.
Okay.
We were able to help our taxpayers a little bit this session, not near enough. It was an interesting thing called COVID and the pandemic, and the appetite was not there to address tax reform near like we should have been able to accomplish.
Right.
It's we were able to bump the homestead exemption from 25,000 up to 40,000. That was a big plus. That
I
helps
didn't know
all
it
of
was
our
that big of a
homeowners.
bump. Yeah,
Yes, sir.
that's a good bump. Yeah.
We were also able to
And that applies to everyone who has a homestead
every
exemption.
homeowner.
Wow.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
That's awesome.
And then also we were able to allocate an additional $5 billion in funding to public education, which takes that burden away from our local taxpayers.
Okay.
It's contribution to cover public education is far more than it was ever supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And we've taken a ton of work to try to mitigate that. Here's one of the issues that we have when it comes to property taxes. You go to your local appraisal district and you voice your concern and then some, because I've had to protest my taxes no different than
Right.
anyone else. And it's quick to point to the comptroller.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to the comptroller and they point back to the local appraisal district.
Mm-hmm.
The buck has to stop somewhere.
Right.
And a lot of it deals with the variance. When the state comes in and does an audit and a spot check of appraisals,
Mm-hmm.
if they are outside of that variance, they can actually pull a percentage of your local funding and say that if it's not important enough to you guys locally to properly appraise and collect the tax dollars that are available there, well, then perhaps we should pull state funding and you can find a way to come up with it locally.
Wow.
That's been the scare tactic. So our local appraisal districts have steadily increased
Mm-hmm.
so that they make sure they don't fall below that variance. So we've done a ton of different measures to try to help mitigate that, to increase that variance
Mm-hmm.
so that it's not so critical, to make sure that they always increase to be on the top side of that.
Mm-hmm.
We've also looked at
Now, is that straight property tax or does that include school tax as well?
Well,
the variance.
the variance is for the appraisals,
Okay, just for the appraisals
so
alone.
which is
Okay.
all tax allocations
okay.
and collections.
Okay.
So, and here's the deal. It's I'm a pretty simple guy.
Mm-hmm.
If I write a check which is the same, my taxes stayed the same.
Mm-hmm.
If I write a bigger check, my taxes went up, and if I write a smaller check, they went down.
That's it.
So even if the tax
Yeah.
rate went down, but I wrote a bigger check,
Mhm.
well, my taxes went up.
Right.
So it really has nothing to do with the percentage. We address the percentage quite a bit, but we don't address the increase in valuation.
Okay.
That's our issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, as a legislature, the appetite has been there to address and try to put protections in there for homeowners, but not often enough do we have those protections for our small business owners.
Mm-hmm.
Come
Yeah,
to
and they get hit hard too.
the Little League right here in Splendora, right there where I'm from. You go to the basketball, baseball, any of those. The footballs that are thrown out at the football games, what names are on those? They are our small businesses.
Right. Absolutely.
We've got to protect those guys, and we have to make sure that they have a voice in Austin represented on their behalf.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, I think to go back to your question, the single most accomplishment is to be an effective, reasonable, conservative voice for rural Texas.
Okay. Awesome. And we talked a little bit about redistricting, so I wanted to ask you how redistricting has changed your area of representation. And I did take a look at the maps, and I was like, wow, that's completely different.
Quite interesting.
So, yeah, it's got to be unusual for you. So when did all this actually take place? Because that was a little bit gray for me to discover, believe it or not. There's just some conflicting stories on the internet about that.
There was a ton of changes. There was
Okay.
a ton of different maps. I'll tell you, the final map that we ended up with is nothing like the maps which had been agreed upon. on several occasions.
Okay.
And so in a nutshell, for the listeners out there, just to kind of oversimplify this process, we have the census every 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
They take the total census and divide that by the 150 members in the Texas House.
Okay.
That number is 195,000. So with a 5% variance, plus or minus, all districts need to be right at 195,000.
Okay.
So the 3 counties that I'd had and that I still represent right now until the new maps go in after this next election cycle are Liberty, San Jacinto, and Walker County.
Okay.
To the T, 195,000. So it's interesting with certain aspects of politics, we have to make sure that we're always very apolitical.
Mm-hmm.
Redistricting maps is not the case whatsoever. We have federally protected minority districts, and those have a ton of parameters that have to always be upheld.
Okay.
But the rest of the maps, it is legal to promote the election of a particular party when drawing the maps.
Really?
100% legal, and that's
Okay.
what it's done.
Okay.
So there are federal contests right now in courts about our maps, and it's predominantly due to our congressional maps,
Mm-hmm.
because we picked up 2 additional congressional seats in the state of Texas because we had a lot of growth.
Mm-hmm.
And predominantly that growth was Hispanic, but the 2 new seats that were drawn are predominantly Caucasian.
Wow.
And
Okay.
they were drawn for promotion of one party over the other, and the party that is in the majority.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
interesting. I mean, I was unaware that that could legally be done, but it's so essentially as a result of that is why we had a ton of changes and a ton of shakeup even in the Texas House right here in the state of Texas.
Wow.
So about 42 to 43% of my district is brand new.
Yeah, that's
So
huge. That's
It's
a
huge.
big
I
difference.
start right over.
But
So-
the numbers relatively remain the same between Republicans and Democrats. I saw you had a little bit of increase in your Republican representation. That's about it that I saw. But I didn't see any demographics as far as race goes. So,
You know what? It's I did not look at that near as much as a lot of my colleagues did, because the district that I represent is not, race and demographic is not a deciding factor.
Mhm.
In our rural areas, we have the whole county rule. If the county can stay whole,
Mhm.
and there's no need to split because it's not above that 195,000 cap, well, then it's supposed to stay whole unless there are no other ways to make the surrounding county maps work.
okay.
I know that somewhat seems oversimplified, but it's
No,
a
I
deal
understand. Yeah.
So essentially, when you combine the populations of San Jacinto, Liberty, and Hardin County, then they're not quite to the 195,000.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at the total population right here in Montgomery County, it is greater than 3 sole representatives can cover.
Right.
So it's supposed to go to a like district, and it has to essentially make sense why it's going this way. So East County, I tell you, it was the best fit to come to my district.
Yeah, it's a crazy group out here.
Yeah, no, East County is it's like where I come from. I mean, 100% my people.
Yeah.
I tell you, I look forward to being able to represent
Yeah.
you guys here. So, and even the way that the maps fell, see, I come down Highway 59 on the west side down to 242.
Mm-hmm.
But on the east side, I go all the way down to 99
Okay.
and then over to Liberty County.
Wow. That's right. Yeah.
So it's strictly based on what the current precincts were and what those
You
populations
got
were.
the neediest part of East Montgomery County.
Well,
You
you know
really do.
what? It happens. I'm
You know?
glad to have it. It's a process. If this job were easy, anybody would do it. So it's a challenge. It keeps you on your toes, but it's definitely a challenge I'm up for, and you
bet.
have to enjoy it.
Yeah. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. So I know that you're on the agricultural committee. How long have you been on that committee?
Actually, just this last session.
Just this last session. Okay. And I know that you had dealt with chronic wasting disease, and you had some legislation that you put forth about that. Let's talk about that a little bit. And first of all, for our viewers who don't know, let's talk a little bit about just basically what chronic wasting disease is and how it affects the population of deer, especially in Texas.
You know, it's an interesting disease and an interesting story and rhetoric that's typically associated with CWD. It is chronic wasting disease. It's a prion-driven disease. However, the aspect of the state of Texas nor the rest of the U.S. cannot tell you exactly where it comes from or how it is transmitted.
But it is fatal in 100% of cases, right?
It is fatal. However, we've never had a documented death occurred in the state of Texas, even though we've had positives detected here.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's not the story that's being portrayed.
Hmm.
So, I mean, serving on that committee and being someone who works directly with the whitetail industry,
Mm-hmm.
I've been part of these conversations ever since the very beginning, ever since I was elected. And it put me better at the table for the conversation to serve on the committee. We oversee the Texas Animal Health Commission.
Mm-hmm.
Texas Animal Health Commission is the vet for the state of Texas.
Right.
So it's good to make sure that we have a positive working relationship between Texas Parks and Wildlife, because whitetail deer are wildlife, and the Animal Health Commission, who is the vet for the state of Texas, and make sure that any directives that we have on statute are science-based, not fear-based.
Okay.
A lot of the rhetoric, I think Texas Monthly put out zombie deer and this, that, and the other.
No. Yeah.
They put out a lot of things, but
Leave it up to journalists.
we've not
we'll
had
take
any
care
of
it.
that. It's
Right. But it is a neurological disorder.
it is a
right?
neurological.
Okay.
It's very similar to mad cow disease.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It rang
And-
kind of true of mad cow for me when I was reading about it. I was like, yeah, that sounds the same.
It's in the same class, and
Yeah.
also scrapies in sheep.
Okay.
It was in sheep, and through genetic selection, it cleared itself up. I'll tell you, we do a ton of testing.
Mm-hmm.
So with there was an emergency rule put in place to change how we do testing. It's actually they can do a actually sample of the base of the brainstem.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to get that other than from a euthanized animal.
Right.
So that's somewhat intrusive
Yeah.
to a live animal. So they also were able to develop and do rectal biopsies. And so there was a big push put in for that testing. And we did over 10,000 tests. And there was not a single one that was detected positive, which was going to be released. The only positive that was detected through that was part of the already routine testing protocols that we had to monitor and to identify this if it became an issue in Texas.
Okay.
So I work directly with the commissioners there at Parks and Wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to, these are business people. These are animals. This is a resource that we have for the state of Texas.
Right.
It has to be protected. And that's one thing that I've told the commission as well as commissioners. I don't want to do anything whichever takes away from your ability to protect a resource as valuable as white-tailed deer and our hunting heritage in the state of Texas. However, I just want to make sure that from the folks that are in the breeding industry, the stipulations and regulations we put in place, they're reasonable and they're well-founded.
Okay.
And if we, I'm a pretty simple from the aspect of, if we say the sky is falling, well, we need to be able to show that it's falling.
Yeah.
And we've not had quite the documentation that it's falling. However, it is still serious enough that we need to keep a good eye on it.
Okay.
But it's,
Has it become a problem in other states? I mean,
it has. Wisconsin. It's became very problem
Okay.
and very prevalent. But it's Dr. Seabury there at Texas A&M University has done a really good job of genetic testing.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain genetic strains that are far more susceptible
Okay.
and that are far more resilient against.
Okay.
It's no different than people and demographics
Right. Yeah,
when
I
it
was
comes
just
to
thinking
COVID.
that myself. Yeah.
I mean, in
Yeah.
COVID, I mean, there are
Right.
certain demographics
Yeah.
and certain body types and genetic lines that are far more susceptible. It's
Yeah.
so I think combination of the monitoring that the state of Texas is doing, as well as the genetic research, will help us better understand what we're dealing with and how to manage it.
Okay.
But it's
And this has been known in Texas since when? 97, I believe?
quite a while.
Yeah.
The first cases, and the first cases all were out of the wild. They were predominantly mule deer that came across from New Mexico,
Wow.
and then also strains that came from up north into the Texas Panhandle. It's the problem is we have a lot of questions that we need answers on.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than throwing the book at this from the regulatory side of it, I think it's very important that we focus on understanding what it is, how to mitigate it, and how to keep it
Yeah.
from being a bigger issue.
Yeah, let's get educated first,
Yes,
and then
sir.
we'll make a decision. Kind of the opposite of the way we handled COVID.
Case in point, I'll leave it at that.
All right. Again, shifting gears. So I wanted to discuss critical race theory. So I have a podcast that's upcoming with a couple of individuals who are school teachers, and they're out of Fort Worth, I believe, and they've got a whole lot of information they're going to bring to us and discuss critical race theory. So what are your thoughts on critical race theory, especially when it comes to truth in education? Because I think that we tread a fine line with critical race theory. There's a lot of it that I think is wrong, but there's some small pieces that I do think are correct. So, and I kind of want to get a better idea from you at where you think the line should be drawn, and should any of this at all even be taught in our schools, or should it be left to the individual parent at home to teach their kids, right from wrong and the truth about our history and things like that? Sorry to make the question so long, but
No, it's I don't support the teaching of critical race theory. I think it's important that our kids teach history as it is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
We try to whitewash history. We try to change that. It repeats itself.
Right.
And I think it's very important we take the good with the bad. I mean, have we as a country done things that we look back on and wish we would have done different? Without a doubt.
Absolutely.
But it's you can't go back and simply turn a blind eye and say that never happened. You look at the Holocaust, you look at other things. It needs to be known. It needs to be understood. And we need to make sure that never happens again.
Right.
And with critical race theory, I think it's every kid has a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the school's job is to teach history. Mm-hmm. However, with the bill, I think when we try to safeguard and protect something, sometimes we go a bit far.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are aspects of the bill which do hamper teachers' ability to do a job of teaching the history that happened.
Right.
So it's anything that we do, it's with every good intention, there's a negative unintended consequence, and I want our teachers to be able to do a good job teaching the facts, teaching what happened, and without interjecting their own political, liberal, leftist agenda. That's what we need to safeguard.
There you go. Yeah, that's a great answer. And I agree. I think that critical race theory just kind of encapsulates the possibilities of truth in reverse racism. I mean, that's really what it is. So, and it's unusual that it even came this far, because, I mean, I just can't even see how the Democratic side would agree with those types of teachings.
No, I agree.
Because it's kind of the same thing that we've gone through on the other side. So it throws me. So
we
really
tend
does.
to polarize issues and whatever rings well for headlines, and we
That's
embrace those and run. And that's not a good way to run our business here in the state of Texas.
It's really not. All right, so I'm going to light up everybody's ears with this next question, because especially here in East Montgomery County, we've had issues in some areas. It's kind of hit and miss. Rural broadband. So let's talk about what ideas that you have for rural broadband and what the future holds for that.
I tell you, we have a really good tight group of rural Southeast Texas legislators. Mm-hmm. We've all worked together. We actually developed an office for rural broadband expansion. I tell you, COVID was probably the best unintended catalyst to convey the need for rural broadband here in Southeast Texas.
I agree with that.
Here in East County, San Jacinto County, I mean, signal and pine trees, they don't always go together very well.
Right.
I mean, I had meetings with service providers that were going to put up towers every so many square miles, and they were going to convey this, and I was pulled out the map, and I said, well, show me where these towers are going to go. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, this one ranch owns these 5 sites. I mean, how do you plan to put those towers there? Have you already spoke to those guys? Mm-hmm. No, but I'm sure they would let us put them there. I was like,
yeah, try that again.
I don't think that's going to be the case. And I had the simple question, because I just got off of a conference call with all of our one of our rural COGs. It was DEC COG for our first responders and our communication systems for all of our first responders that are in the field, and radio capabilities. Mm-hmm. They're greatly hindered also by our pine trees,
right,
and by our height of our towers.
Mm-hmm.
And then
it kills line of sight.
Something called the FAA. Mm-hmm. There are regulations on how high you can put those towers, and if you go above a certain height, how they're to be handled. and so they want to put those towers too low to go above the pine trees.
Okay.
So it's in my capacity, you always have to be very mindful of what the need is, make sure we address that. But then when you have service providers that come to my office and they convey what their plans are, what their recommendations are, who's going to financially benefit from this?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not the citizens here first and foremost, then we have a problem.
So let me ask you, with legislation, as far as the towers on private lands, would that fall under eminent domain, and they would be able to do it with legislation in place, or would it be that type of legislation?
It would require legislation, and I don't see us going to that point. I think we have other mechanisms in place to go with our. I know I work a lot with our providers. Predominantly AT&T is one of the big ones that works a lot here in this area.
Yeah, and their fiber spin ups have been great. So I mean, I don't know as far as what they're equipped to be able to provide, but over the next 10 years or so, I would imagine that they've given considerable amount of thought to, putting together a great fiber spin out here at least. And we've already seen some of it. Like I said, it's hit and miss, but it's just kind of weird. I'd love to see a map of it and try to determine for myself why there's so many holes in it.
No, I hear you.
And it may be the canopy, for all things. It could possibly
I think that's a big
be
part of it.
Yeah.
We've been receiving rural connectivity grants for a while as far as trying to actually bury fiber to connect our rural cities, predominantly help our schools.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very effective. However, when we aren't able to bring the kids into the classroom, that fiber there at the schoolhouse doesn't help.
Right.
A kid who's trying to do online learning at home, and we're in a technological age. It's there's more need than we have answers right now. However, it is definitely at the forefront, and something that I think is the one positive of the pandemic that we all had to suffer through. Is it definitely increased the speed of progress going forward with rural connectivity and broadband.
Yeah, or at least the need for. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So that's great. Okay, and this is going to be my question is rather long.
All right, go ahead.
But we're going to get into this. As one of the sponsors of SB8, the Texas Heartbeat Act, how do you feel about this type of private citizen enforcement and its attempt to be adopted by other states? An example, I know that whereas civil lawsuits are being used to enforce legislation, okay? And I know that California, I don't know if the bill has been approved, but a new bill has been placed before California legislators. It's a gun law enabling civil actions to be brought against manufacturers and dealers. Do you think private citizens should become the enforcement avenue to varying types of new legislation? And I believe that, and I could be wrong, but I believe that the SB8 was the first type of legislation that created this type of situation that allowed anybody to sue somebody, who they thought either assisted or played a role in helping with an abortion. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, especially because I do think that because it did pass in Texas and it looks like it's going to continue moving forward, I'm curious as to whether other states will adopt it and they'll start to use it in other avenues of legislation. So what are your ideas on that?
A lot of depth in that question.
I know there really is, and I'm sorry it was long, but
no, that's fine. I tell you, I'm unapologetically pro-life. Always have been. I think it's a very important thing that we stand up for those that are most vulnerable, can't stand up for themselves. So I was glad to be a part of the Heartbeat Act and help get that passed through this legislation. It will save the lives of thousands right here in the state of Texas. When it comes to California and a lot of their things, I think that's a great display of what a liberal legislature can accomplish, or the problems that they're going to bring to a state of Texas. And I think we look at what California's done, and then also we look at what we've done at a federal level. And really, without getting too deep in the weeds on that, I can tell you I'm quite proud to be from Texas, where we are pro-Second Amendment and pro-life. There has to be a reason and method and true conviction of what we're trying to help and what we're trying to fix. And I think our Texas Heartbeat Act was the best way to get that done in the state of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Is it perfect? It's not. Is it probably the most substantial step we've ever been able to take? Yes. Was
in the country.
In the country.
Yeah.
And to be upheld by the courts.
Right.
It's, yeah, when it comes to California, like I said, glad to be from Texas.
Yeah, I do believe that it's a big step in the reversal of Roe versus Wade. I really do. So, and that's it's unusual that it came about like it did, But okay, good answer on that.
I appreciate it.
Okay, so after you get elected, what will you change in your next term? So, each term I'm sure that you learn new things. So, what would be the one thing that you'd say, okay, I'm going to do this different?
Property tax is still the biggest issue. It plagues every one of us, especially as homeowners and business owners and landowners. You should not be punished by trying to do good things and provide for your family, and for building a nice house and for building a nice business.
Right.
We worked a lot on that this last session. We were not able to go near as far as we needed to, and I think one of the big reasons was because of COVID. We were very slow to be able to get this session going, and when all aspect we were trying to get an additional $1.8 billion for the border, and we were trying to have to cover COVID, make sure we had the resources and everything else. It's just the timing was not right. It needed to be right. It needed to be done, but it just wasn't. So I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to definitely continue to push for. And the negative consequence of our very porous border, it's rural health care has been hit immensely, as well as our public school system. Because when you have an influx of individuals who expect to receive services which they did not contribute for the process of paying of, and it puts that strain on all local taxpayers, including you and myself and everyone else here. Those are issues we have to address. And just because there is that need, and we are having to pay the brunt of a failed federal political system, we as taxpayers shouldn't be the one having to pick up the tab for that.
I agree with that. And let me ask you, just as an extension to that, do you think there's any other viable options to controlling the border other than a border wall? I mean, could there be economic development in Mexico and south of the border, places like that, or other aid programs that may keep them there, and as opposed to wanting to come here? And you know what I mean?
No, I definitely do. I was down in Laredo working less than a week ago, and I was working with about 10 miles from the border for. I was doing some whitetail reproduction work for a fellow who owns an import company, and a very strong Republican, which was kind of surprising, caught me off guard. But he's a businessman right there, and he sees and he understands. We spoke quite a bit about the negative impact of the border, but you look at the number of goods that cross across. It's we have to have a good working relationship with Mexico, but we can definitely accomplish that without the open border. I mean, it's negative impact on their economy as well.
Right.
And it's all about it's what we're dealing with right here in South Liberty County and East Montgomery County on if we're going to have the growth, how can we make it positive growth? I don't know how best to do that, but it's a deal that spent time down there with Governor Abbott. I've been down there with President Trump, and here are some of the things that we're trying, and here's some of the downsides of those.
Okay.
So federally, we're putting up a border wall. And with the change in administration, the Biden administration has 100% failed on that front, dropped the ball, and we're all having to pay for that. And I think they're even understanding that that was not a good idea.
Right.
So there are resources still on the border that we as the state of Texas cannot touch to continue that process. So as part of the $1.8 billion that we allocated to help down there, we're trying to go forward with our own fiscal barrier. And here's one part of a fiscal barrier is somebody crosses right here into your yard and you don't have a single sign that says no trespassing and there's no fence. even though it is still trespassing, you and I know that is wrong.
Right.
We are limited on how that can be handled from a law enforcement side of things.
Right.
So if we have the physical barrier, that elevates the offense of illegally crossing over the border.
Okay.
Flip side of that coin, even if we have the funding, if we go forward with that, they say, well, we'll build our own wall. In Texas, we have this very strong belief, and I support it wholeheartedly, called private property rights.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you want a fence to go across my place doesn't mean that I may want the fence to go across my place. And we're not going to use eminent domain in that process.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the other deal. If we have
Can you use eminent domain?
Part of the process and part of the funding is we're not going to use eminent domain as a state to get that done.
Okay.
So that had to be part of that process.
Okay. So you have to have the cooperation of landowners. Okay.
You do. And that's
Seems
what...
like that wouldn't be a problem. And I can see in some places that it would, though. Yeah.
Well, and here's where
Because
it gets a little
people
more
are people.
complicated. It's along the river.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a steep levee or you have rough terrain and you want to put a fence 100 yards off of the river rather than right on the river,
Mm-hmm.
am I losing that land? Who does that land now belong to? And am I still paying taxes on that land?
Yeah, that's a question.
I mean, that
Right.
it's not as simple as it would seem.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, as part of the state of Texas, we've worked to take some of our federal detention centers and our old jails and actually ramp those back up and incarcerate those that are they are caught crossing illegally.
Mm-hmm.
So there is some negative consequence rather than simply a pat on the back and say, "Oh, go back home."
Right.
So, but with that,
But they're only temporarily incarcerated pending
Probably about
deportation,
90 days.
correct? Yeah, so that's not too bad.
But here's the flip side of that coin where it gets really expensive. Our TDCJ prisons are not air conditioned heated. They follow state guidelines. They don't have to follow federal guidelines or have to follow jail guidelines.
Okay.
If they're incarcerated in a jail, a steady temperature has to be maintained. So we are essentially air conditioning uninsulated solo cups.
Wow.
It's not very efficient.
Right.
And then again, you have a ton of people that are kicked back. I was like, we have a ton of state employees that work for TDCJ and with their offenders there that they're not receiving that. But why are we providing those services to those
Okay,
across
yeah,
illegally?
and I can see how they wouldn't understand that, and that would create another problem.
And then
Right.
available staff and jailers. I mean,
Wow.
we're not able to adequately staff our jails here.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to go through the standards, go through all the parameters that have to take place, it is very expensive.
Right.
And make a long story short, I am confident we need to make sure that we take the White House back in 2024, and we need to have the full support of the federal government to get this done.
Yeah, you do need the full support of the federal government because it's a multi-layered problem. It's
It
not
is.
just a single problem called border security. I mean,
Yes, sir.
it envelopes a lot. Yeah, and you kind of made that clear. So thank you for that. That's good. Okay.
If it were only that simple. But I mean,
Yeah, I wish it was, but
and
yeah.
the trips that I've spent with the testimony that we heard there at the Capitol and the legislature, and then the trips that I've had to personally be down on the border, it helps drive home a lot of the complications that we have the best team of folks trying to get it figured out and trying to get it done as expeditiously as possible. It's still a pretty steep climb.
So I wonder what the core issue is in Mexico, though. There's got to be at least, and maybe not at least, but there's got to be one singular component that makes life bad enough in Mexico to where guys want to leave and come. And is it the cartels? Is it the fact that they have just a kind of a corrupt government there? Or
I think the corruptions and the cartels are a huge part of that, but also you have to keep in mind that a ton of the folks that are crossing, they're not just Mexican citizens.
yeah, they're from south
They're
of
from
there.
countries
Right.
south, and also they are from countries around the world who are known
Supporters
enemies,
of terrorism. Yeah,
supporters of terrorism.
right.
And
Yeah, it's a pipeline for sure.
it is not simply an immigrant who is trying to come better their life.
Mm-hmm.
That is very different. That still doesn't make it right. But I mean, that is a very
Right.
different scenario than those who come here with a strong hate and ill will for the United States of America. And that's what a lot of people are coming across.
Scary,
It really is.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so you've got two opponents in this race, Janice Holt and Ronnie Bubba-Tullis. Have you met either of these guys?
You know what? When it comes to campaigns, I focus on my own race.
Mm-hmm.
I've had the opportunity to be the state representative for House District 18 the last 3 terms. With the changing district lines, East County and Hardin County are now going to be part of House District 18. So my main concern and my main efforts are to being present here, meeting everybody that I can, and seeing how best I can serve as the state representative, and then my own campaign of seeing how I can be able to come back in that capacity. I mean, we've worked really hard to run a positive campaign, and any campaign I've ever been part of, and it's if I can't get elected on my own merits, then maybe I don't need to be there.
I like it. It's a great answer.
We keep things very simple. I applaud anyone who wants to be part of the legislative or the political process, but when it comes to my race, I focus on what I can do for the people and how to win my race, and we keep it at that.
There you go. Okay, so for the voters out there in East County and the surrounding area, can you give us a little bit about where you're going to be in the next few weeks? Any public appearances that you may have?
We were actually here in East County last night. We had a really good turnout there in Splendora at the East County Community Development Center.
Okay.
And we're going to be in Lumberton tonight. We're all over. I tell you, Christmas is coming.
Yeah.
So
fast and hard.
Kind of an interesting side note. It's all but 6 weeks out of a 10-month period I was in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
That is a far cry from back home and being back here in the district where I needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to double down on making a living because what a lot of people don't understand, the congressional salary and a state salary are very different.
Right.
We get paid $600 a month.
Yeah.
And
big money.
But that's by design.
That's big money.
It's to make sure that you have the goal was so you can have successful businessmen and women who can run their business, be active in their communities, can afford to step away to serve at the state capitol, and then go right back home.
Okay.
To their business and to their people.
That makes sense.
And that's one thing we've really tried hard to do. So it's we're here all the time.
Right.
I was not super present over the last few weeks because, lack of better words, I was on the road trying to make a living.
Okay.
Because that living affords me the opportunity to be a strong, solid voice for the folks here in East County. I'm 100% committed to being present.
Mm-hmm.
We were at East County, the Buyers Group, just a couple into last week, trying to help the kids. If you guys ever have anything, ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Okay.
I'm just right down the road, and that's one thing that I want to make sure that East County knows and understands. You are not the stepchild of Conroe proper.
Okay.
You are a strong part of House District 18, and you are just as important as any part that I have and represent. So I am here for you and all ears, and truly, I have to meet everybody and figure out what the concerns are. The issues you deal with here are very similar to what I've already been working with.
Sure.
So we've already proven ourselves to be effective, have the relationships. I'll tell you, it's kind of interesting going back. I'll only be going back for my 4th term. That sounds like a lot, but I've only served 6 years. We only have 2-year terms.
Right, yeah, your terms are short.
But I had the seniority and the relationships with leadership to be effective on day one.
Okay.
We're already working with our state agencies. We have a fully staffed office right now at the Capitol, and we're making sure that we're working through this interim drainage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's coming down here. I saw where they're cleaning the ditches, and
drainage is a big deal.
They're having to clean pretty deep.
Commissioner Metz on, and we discussed drainage in depth just recently.
And that's something. I mean, with the floods that Liberty County and San Jacinto County has been dealing with, it's hit you guys just the same.
Oh yeah.
And that's one thing that we are very well versed at.
Okay.
And so bailsfortexas.com, that's the website.
Okay.
It's also on the Facebook page.
Fantastic.
If you guys have any events coming up, let us know. I know in January, we're going to be there at Roman Forest. Have been very active there, going to the chamber, trying to make sure that we are anywhere and everywhere we need to be. But I have to know where I need to be from you guys.
Yeah, and you
So
can't
that's all
spread
I
yourself
ask.
too thin.
I
got
got
it.
Well, and I don't think I even hit on this. I've got a heck of a good wife at home who's she taught third grade for 9 years, and now she does the RTI and special ed, or RTI and GT, which are both under the special ed umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
So public education is beyond near and dear to me. My whole family's in education. And then I've got 2 boys. Cinco is my oldest. My namesake, I'm Ernest Bell, is the 4th, and he's the 5th.
Cool.
And then Rigby, they're 12 and 15, and just very active in sports and in 4-H and FFA. And so I am. I like to have the opportunity to serve. I like to have the opportunity to be a dad and a husband there too, and just be a working guy that has to make a living. So we have a lot of things going, but there will always be enough time. If someone needs something, call.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Representative Bells, I appreciate you coming in, and I wanted to thank you for your service to the country. You know, not only to Texas, but to the country as a whole too, because it sounds like your ideas are not only good for the state, but they're good for the country. So yeah, I appreciate you having you in, and I appreciate the guys in your office too, because it was easy to work with them, and so that made your appearance here a whole lot easier for us to deal with.
Well, Hank, I appreciate what you do. I appreciate the opportunity too, and like I said, you know how to get a hold of me directly. So if somebody said they can't find me, call Hank. He can get me too.
There you go. All right, guys. Well, there you have it. So here's the thing. I don't want you to vote for a name. I want you to vote for a group of ideas. I want you to be educated about the people that you're going to vote for in all these different races. So it doesn't take that long. You take a little bit of time, do some research. If you have any questions, call guys like this. They'll talk to you. They'll tell you what their plans are, what their ideas are, and you can get in line with that. Together we can straighten this whole thing out. We just got to be in there and got to be conscious of it. And more importantly, you got to get out there and vote, be a part of it all. So Mark Hogan couldn't be with us today, but he's here in spirit. And I'm Hank Vatt. This is Hank's Think Tank, and we're out. You did.